Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and today we're going to be covering the starter deck challenge for the Amber and Amethyst deck. If you haven't seen the other two videos, go ahead and check those out up here for the Ruby and Emerald and the Sapphire and Steel builds as well. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I play. Now, this particular deck is widely considered the best deck out of the box, and there's really a very strong argument to be made for that. Has a lot of card draw, has the fewest number of uninkables in the deck. It has probably the best and most bombs compared to the other cards or other decks as well. If you're not familiar with the term bombs, that means big, impactful card that is going to just basically destroy your opponent's side of the table if it sees play. So with all that, it really just makes it a very complete deck out of the box. However, it does have some glaring weaknesses. Now, before we jump into the individual deck breakdown of the cards and my thoughts on the choices that you can make inside the deck, one thing you've got to understand with this deck, it has absolutely zero removal in it. None. Nada, zip, zilch. Not one card can destroy an opponent's card without them being exerted and being able to get challenged into it. So that does make some cards very difficult. Evasive is a very hard mechanic for this deck to deal with because it has very few evasive cards itself and no way to just straight remove those characters from it. The other weakness that this deck has is, though it is very low costed and can go wide very early, it has the worst lore generation of any of the decks. By far, you cannot get behind with this deck because it has no ability to catch up. So you've got to keep those things in mind. And for those two reasons, it makes this deck very, very challenging once the other decks have been upgraded with the pack that comes with them. The other ones, with their high uninkable count and a lot of unplayable cards in their decks, can really take a lot of that chaff out and replace it with good stuff from their 12-card booster pack. Stuff that is inkable, stuff that is better supporting their lore generation, and it's much harder to address an entire deck with zero removal, because removal is fairly uncommon, and poor lore generators, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get lots of 2 and 3 lore generators out of just one booster pack. So that's why I would say, like, while this deck is extremely strong out of the box, which is really the only way to test for the starter deck challenges, because you don't know what's going to come in that 12-card pack, but once that 12-card pack is introduced, this has the potential to be one of the weakest decks that you can choose. So having said that, let's go ahead and jump in to the deck breakdown. All right, so here we have the deck list for it. Right out of the box, we've got our 1-drop Hey Hey with a 1 lore generator, 1/2, a little understated, but he does have the ability support, which I do like. It does allow for some early favorable trades while he is questing. Stitch over here is just kind of our generic 2/2 for 1. Perfectly fine, inkable. We don't have anything for him to shift up into this deck, so he is just a vanilla 2/2 for 1. Olaf, again, another 1-drop, 1/3, 1 lore generator. Can create some favorable trades. More often than not, you'll find him just kind of doing a last point of damage that someone has left to them, possibly surviving with that 3 willpower. But again, perfectly fine. It's just another 1-drop to hold some of the opponents at bay. Pascal does have evasive. Unfortunately, he's not big enough to really challenge any of the evasive in the red-green deck, which is probably this deck's biggest weakness out of the box. He is a consistent lore generator, but as we're going to see, like, the deck itself, while it can go wide very quickly, doesn't have a ton of great lore generation. So another 1 lore generator isn't super helpful in that sense, but again, perfectly fine even as a 1/1 stat line. Minnie Mouse, very solid in these starter deck challenges. These overstatted 2-drops. This 2/3 is going to allow her to trade favorably with basically all the 1-drops in the game, and a couple of the 2-drops Aurora out of the Sapphire deck, most notably the 2/2 Lord Generator. Can't turn exert herself whenever a Minnie Mouse is in play. Dr. Facilier. Now, he is a 2-drop inkable. We do have the big Facilier in here, so he is a shift target for that. I don't like these 0 power challengers because the biggest benefit of having a big stat line on your willpower is that hopefully that you can get a 2-for-1 out of these exchanges. And unfortunately, whenever they have 0 strength on the swing back, they're not going to exchange. You've completely taken away any ability for your opponent to not swing into them. So, he challenger for 2, trades favorably with a lot of other 1 and 2 drops, but then can be finished off with literally any other character without risk of any kind of other exchange from it. So, not a huge fan of those, but he's perfectly fine in this deck, especially since we have the Shift Facilier to come down on top. The Magic Brooms, you actually get 3 Magic Brooms. This card by itself is not great. You're just going to be using it to shuffle in your key cards if you have them. You can dilute your opponent's deck as well. So if they've got some, bad cards already in the discard pile, you don't have a prime target to shuffle, you can just shuffle that bad card back into their deck. So don't forget you can do that as well. We do have one of the Sorcerer Mickeys that we'll get to here in a little bit to turn this engine on. Yzma, very solid 2-drop. I think she gets underestimated a lot. Her ability is, she's perfectly fine stats-wise for a 2-drop, but then she's also got an ability that's really going to help filter bad draws away from the top of your deck. If you can keep her alive, if your opponent doesn't target her, you can actually generate some really, really valuable top deck with this character. Big fan of this one as a 2-of. Maximus, a 3/3 for 3, very good stat line with the ability to make very favorable trades when he comes in. This card is a very, very solid card for the starter deck challenges. A big body, again, 3/3 is on curve for that ability, and the fact that he's going to come in, drop one of their 1 or 2 drops, and basically lets you get a free exchange is very solid as well. Mickey Mouse here. Very, very important character for this particular starter deck because he's one of the few 2 Lord Generators that you get in the deck. You have 3 copies of him. He is a 3/3 for 3, so kind of the regular stat line for the 2 Lord Generators at 3. This is one of the better early drops that you can get, followed up by some of the other ones here at all at 3, coincidentally enough. You've got Maleficent at a 2/2 for 3, so a little understated, but she does draw a card when she comes into play. She's also a 3-drop, which allows her to sing some of the songs that are in the deck, which is also very nice. Definitely never a card that you're going to be upset to see. She does not trade very favorably up, but she can still take out some of the 1 and 2 drops in the game while replacing herself whenever you play her. Very nice. Rafiki is one of the all-stars of this deck, and you get 3 copies of this guy right here. In the early game, he is almost always going to be a 2-for-1, which is fantastic. The fact that he can come in and make an immediate impact on the board is fantastic, and then the fact that he can sing basically all the songs in this deck is also fantastic. Again, another card. Now, not being inkable, you're probably not going to want to see a ton of copies of this guy early, but still a card that you're going to very rarely be upset to see. Wardrobe here. She is a little overstated on the willpower for your 3 drops, so she does trade favorably with those 3 drops. She is inkable, which is nice. This deck can go wide very early and has a lot of really valuable 3-drop plays, so I feel like she kind of tends to be undervalued in this particular deck. I do like these overstated 3 drops in the starter deck challenge, but more often than not, like, she's going to go to ink while you play like a Maleficent, a Mickey Mouse, or even a Rafiki. We do have Ariel here. She is a slightly understated 4-drop with 2 Lore Generation, which is, again, the main feature of this character. She cannot sing any of your songs, so you do have that drawback, and in this deck, it actually can come into effect quite often. Again, this deck is very hungry for lore generation, so despite not being a rock star by any means, having that 2 lore generation is very important. Similarly with Cinderella here, another understated 4-drop, but she does have that 2 lore generation. She has Singer 5, which is not relevant in this particular build unless you get something out of your pack that you're adding into the deck. Her ability also almost never comes into effect. There's very few princesses in here. There's a very, very small princess sub-theme in here. I think you've got Ariel, you've got Cinderella, you've got Princess Mickey, and then you've got Moana. Honestly, very, very rarely do I find that I have more than one princess in play at any point in time. So like the secondary ability, it's there, she has it. It's not super relevant. That 2 strength really hurts this character, but again, it is a 2 lore generator and it is inkable, so it's as well-rounded as you could expect for an uncommon here. Hades at 1, he's a 4-drop, uninkable, understated, pretty much across the board, but he does allow you to get a character back from your discard pile to your hand, which is kind of nice. If you've gotten one of your bigger bombs out that game, or it's late game, like you can grab a Rafiki and come in and swing with the Rafiki immediately. You can go back and grab a Mickey Mouse or a Broom if they were able to banish them earlier in the game. So I like him as a 1 of. 3 strength is not terrible. He is going to trade at least most of the time even. With 2, he's not going to trade favorably if you have to end up questing with him, because he'll probably just take him out with the 1-drop at that point. Jafar here. Jafar is actually huge in this format. The ability to be a 5 strength challenger for only 4 is pretty hard to deal with in the starter deck challenges. He basically will trade with anything that they've played on their side of the field, probably survive because he's got this 5 willpower, and he's got 2 strength. So if they try to finish him off with like a smaller character, then he's probably going to take that character out with him. But they've got to take him out, because if he readies again, he's going to be able to swing 5 again into another character at that point in time, or worse yet, heal up some of the willpower that he has. This guy, while I'm not huge on him in standard, in the starter deck challenges, this guy is very, very, very strong. We have Jetsam next. Jetsam is like your sole answer to the green evasive and the red-green evasive creatures. And he's only got 1 lore generation, which, again, we talk about how slow of a lore generating deck this deck really is. So having 1 lore generation on turn 4 is pretty slow. He does trade, at least stats-wise, with Pongo, and with Flotsam down here, he can gain Rush and give Flotsam evasive, who is a 2 lore generator. So again, he's inkable, a little understated. I would have liked to seen maybe either 4 willpower here or a 2nd lore generation here, just as a comparison to the other cards kind of in that set. I mean, you have Pongo coming in around there, you have Tinkerbell coming in there, both 2 lore generators. I don't think this ability to give evasive to Flotsam is really worth the fact that he's only got 1, but it is what it is. Mickey Mouse is your first kind of like bomb in this deck, and this deck does get 2, which is really nice. And one of the reasons why this deck is probably widely considered the best out of the box, those bombs in tandem with the draw cards to help you get to those bombs. The ability here is he reduces the cost of magic brooms to 1, which is nice, and will come into effect more often than you may think. He also has the ability Ceaseless Worker, though, which is whenever one of those brooms is banished during a challenge, it returns to your hand. Now, that increases the value of those brooms tremendously. Again, they are pretty well statted, and the fact that he makes them a 1-drop makes them perfectly well statted for them to be able to just continually keep swinging into your opponent's characters and just drumming up tons of advantage, especially since they're going to be shuffling in friends on the other side. They're going to be shuffling in Rafikis. They're going to be shuffling in Maleficents to continue that advantageous draws for you while wearing your opponent's stuff down. Now, I will say he is a 2 lore generator. unless you have the entire field empty or have no other choice other than to quest with him, I would not quest with this guy often, because you're not going to want to lose him once you've got that engine going. But if you don't have any of the brooms, or your opponent doesn't have a rusher or some way to deal with him immediately, then sure, get your 2 lore generation from there. But this guy is much more valuable for his abilities in play than his ability to generate 2 lore. We got Moana here. She is a 5-drop inkable 1/6 3 lore generator. Now, 3 lore generator in this deck is very, very nice, especially since she's really probably the only 3 lore generator in this deck that you'd actually use to generate lore. However, this 1/6 stat line is pretty awful. And as we just mentioned, the princess sub-theme is pretty minor in this deck, so it's not something that comes up really hardly ever. And 1/6 really does kill this card for me in this deck. She's good enough to keep because she's inkable and a 3 lore generator, which may just be enough to catch you back up with the other 2 decks. But other than that, like, she's just not going to trade favorably. They'll be able to throw basically whatever they want at her and have their guys survive, which is just not a great place to be at. Now, in Constructed, when you can build a little bit more around her ability, it's a slightly different story. This one strength is just an absolute killer for this card. Then we have Flotsam. We talked about Flotsam a little bit. He's uninkable. He is a 3/4 2 lore generator, which is nice. It does get Rush, which is also nice, just as another removal, kind of a 4th copy of Rafiki, if nothing else, and has the ability to give your Jetsam up here Rush. Now, giving Jetsam Rush could make a difference if they already have Pongo in play. You can come in and just take Pongo out immediately. The problem that I have with this card is it takes 5 and it is uninkable, which can cause problems if you don't hit your early draw cards. Other than that, though, like, you almost have to keep him in here because of the 2 lore generation. The Rush is just kind of an added bonus. We have Sven next as a 1-of. He's a 6-drop. You're really not going to get to 6 too often unless you already have, like, Facilier in your hand. So you're not going to play him a ton of times. However, if you do play him, he's actually really big-bodied and very hard to deal with. 5/7 are some pretty monster stats in the starter deck challenge. Again, only a 1 lore generator, so he's definitely not going to help you catch up in that regard. But very often, this guy will end up being a 3-for-1, unless your opponent has some big body they're willing to sacrifice for him. And even then, like, you're still probably in a good spot. However, again, you rarely will get to 6 unless you're kind of forcing yourself to get up to 7 for a Facilier in your hand. And if you're trying to get to the 7, you probably are going to have to ink this guy to make this happen, unless you've just been very fortunate with your draw engine cards up to that point in time. And then we have Facilier, which is a absolute huge bomb of a card. I know early on people were just like hard mulliganing for this guy, and we'll talk about that here in the next section as well. This guy has the ability to shift at 5. If you can get this guy into play on turn 5, you're doing really, really good. However, only having 2 of the smaller Faciliers, it's not super common. At a 4/5 body, perfectly fine stats-wise. He is a 3 lore generator. However, you will rarely use this because you will always want to keep this guy as protected as possible because of this ability into the shadows. Where one of your other characters is banished in a challenge, you may return that card to your hand. This card gets really disgusting with things like Rafiki. You can basically just pay 3 to deal 3 damage to any exerted character as many times as you want to. And Rafiki will just keep returning to your hand over and over and over again. Cards like Maximus, where you can challenge with the Maximus, have him go back to your hand, replay the Maximus to drop somebody's strength and challenge with someone else. Just very, very strong card interactions. If this guy stays in play for very long, you just can't really lose. I mean, the ability just generates so much card advantage in the deck that already generates the most card advantage that it's almost an insurmountable hill to climb. Like, the Sapphire Steel deck has almost no way to deal with this guy if he remains unexerted outside of 2 spells. Like, they can smash and fire the cannons into him, then they can deal with him. The red-green starter deck has Dragon's Fires as a 3-of to deal with this guy, but we've already said this deck has some recovery ability to bring him back after he's been banished as well. But by keeping this guy upright, pretty much every other deck has a time, like especially in the mirror. The mirror has no way to deal with this guy. So if you're playing in the mirror matchup and you get this down, like they literally just have to hope you quest with him, because if you don't quest with him, there's nothing they can do about it. Control your temper and our actions here. This Maximus's ability on a one-time use action. Most often I will ink this, but occasionally it does open up some good line of play. Again, the difference between this and like he's got a sword or vicious betrayal is this allows you to save your characters in favorable exchanges, where the other two just kind of let you punch up, but you're probably going to lose those characters. So I do like this more than those cards, but being a one-time use action, still more often than not, it ends up in my inkwell. Be Our Guest is a very good card. I like this card in Constructed. I like this card in Limited. The low cost and the ability to sing this card is very nice. It's going to take the best card out of your top 4, so you're going to be getting more quality cards than your opponent should be getting. And again, being inkable is very nice as well. Part of Your World, not huge fan of this card. It is nice if you draw like your Facilier or your Mickey Mouse or Rafiki to get something back along that caliber. Not being inkable, though, means if you don't have a good target for this card, it really is just clogging up your hand. It is singable, though, so that is nice in that respect. So, and you do have a lot of 3-drops in the deck, so you can get this out for free in one of those exchanges if you need to. Friends on the Other Side, on the other hand, is an absolutely amazing card, and you get 3 of them in this deck. This card is the king of consistency in the starter deck challenges. The ability to draw 2 cards, so it actually nets card advantage, is fairly rare in this card game. The fact that it is also singable on curve for a very high number of 3-drops in this deck is also very, very nice. Card is absolutely amazing. It is unfortunate that sometimes you do end up having to ink this card just to be able to play this card. I have noticed like that 3-drop, while you have a ton of those 3-drops, can sometimes be problematic to get to depending on how your draws in your first mulligan was. But all the way around, just a solid card. I think I had mentioned that all of our songs were 3 or less. This is technically a song that is over 3. You never play this thing. Like, there's just never going to be enough value for this most times, other than just a random one-off scenario. This card always goes to my inkwell. I've never actually played this song. The fact that it is singable is whatever. I just can't imagine very many scenarios where I would rather heal 3 damage from all my characters rather than just having another ink. It just doesn't happen that often. In comparison, we have our Dingle Hopper, which is kind of similar. The card pretty much always ends up in your inkwell. There are some random scenarios, though, like where you might play it to start slowly healing some damage. Having one of them in play is not terrible. Being able to challenge with a Rafiki and, have him survive the challenge and be able to start taking damage off of him kind of forces your opponent to swing back into him very quickly. So it's not bad in that respect. It's not going to be a game changer, but again, it's inkable and conditionally good, so I'm fine with this card in the deck. And that kind of brings us to our cost curve. As you can see, this one is very heavy on our 3-drops, which is where a lot of our best cards are going to be. Now, that is a good thing, and that is a bad thing sometimes. As I was saying, like, you kind of get choked up. You want to keep and play all these 3-drops. They're low enough on your curve so that you don't want to mulligan them away early in the game, but then you end up with like 4 really good 3-drops in your hand and nothing to ink. So just be careful with that in this particular deck. You are going to occasionally have to put good 3-drops in your inkwell so that you can play 3-drops and hopefully start that draw engine. Now, with that in mind, make sure you're prioritizing the right 3-drops in those scenarios, because obviously you can't ink Rafiki. Maleficent and your friends on the other side will help you kind of get over that hump so that you have something to ink for your 4-drops when you get to those as well. So those are the kinds of the ones I would prefer to keep. So like Wardrobe, like I said, often ends up in my inkwell because of that very fact. Like Mickey Mouse is my first 2 lore generator. I want to keep him. And, and the other 2 draw cards. And then obviously Rafiki can't be inked. So that's why Wardrobe, I think in this deck especially, gets overlooked a lot. Now, you do have a very low number of non-inkables, which is very, very nice. And your non-inkables, for the most part, are all pretty key cards, so you're not going to want to necessarily ink them anyways. So I think this right here, combined with all the card draw that is in the set or the deck, is really why the deck out of the box is widely considered to be the best one of the 3 decks. All right, now we're going to take a look at the cards that we would take out of this deck if we are playing in the Starter Deck Challenge and we are able to upgrade with our 1 pack that's in. You're going to notice that this is the lowest number of cards that I would take out. And you're going to notice when we go through the list that even a number of these could actually stay in. We talk about quality out of the box deck. That is, again, another really big strength of this deck is it's just got the fewest duds straight out of the box, which is good for playing the deck straight out of the box. But if you're looking for cards to take out, for impactful cards that you might get out of your pack, there's not a ton of options of stuff that I would at least identify as low-hanging fruit for this particular deck. So we've got Sven here, and these are not in order of priority. I would take them out. Again, Sven is perfectly fine in the deck. He is one of the probably easiest cards to upgrade, though, because, again, you're not going to play him often because of this high cost. If you can find a lower cost 2 lore generator, or even like a other ability character at maybe 4 or 5 even, that can be something that will actually come into play more often, I would say this guy's a very easy one to upgrade in the deck because of that. Again, just want to reiterate, not that he's a bad card, but you really just won't get to 6 very often, and going to 6 a lot of times is going to require you to ink this guy so that you can play Facilier the following turn. Similar, Control Your Anger, or Temper rather, perfectly fine card in the deck because it is inkable and situationally relevant. However, if you can find a card to upgrade it, it's probably one of the least impactful cards in the deck, will most often just be an ink. So if you're replacing it with another card that has more impact and also inkable, is a very nice choice there. Now, Part of Your World is probably the number 1 card I would cut out of here, not being ink and being situational. While the situation should come up more often than some of the other ones we've talked about on the channel previously, I don't like that combination of situational and uninkable. This is probably the first card I would look to cut if you were going to be upgrading anything out of the deck, to really just about any impactful card that is in there. If it's inkable, an extra bonus. Again, we're already working with a low number of inkable cards, so taking out inkable cards for uninkable ones isn't necessarily bad for this particular one either. Now, Hakuna Matata is another one here who is, again, inkable, so fine to leave in, but you're just not ever going to play this one. So if you can find an impact card in the deck, I would replace Hakuna Matata with that card. And then finally, we have the Dingle Hopper. Like we just discussed prior to this, we have the ability to take this card and use it if we need to. And this is probably off of this list here, the last one that I would probably upgrade, simply because, again, for 1 cost investment, it has an ability that can be relevant. If you ever need to play it, you'll be able to. And it's inkable, so it's never going to be a dead card in your hand as far as that goes. It's a terrible top deck, obviously, late game. but perfectly fine to leave in there in some number, maybe not 3 necessarily, but perfectly fine there. Again, this is going to be very dependent on what you get out of your pack of 12, but I would say these are going to be your 9 weakest cards in the deck to upgrade for that. All right, now getting to the cards that you want to mulligan for on this deck. Now this is actually probably the most challenging deck to do this with as well, because a lot of it is going to play off of what you have in that first 7. So we'll kind of try to do it with as much information as we can, but this one you really do have to just be familiar with the deck and know what you are getting into. We have 19 cards that I would look for in your opening hand, but some of these are going to be conditional based on other cards, and we'll try to go through that as well. I think 1-drops here. I picked Stitch. The deck obviously has other 1-drops. You need 1-drops in this deck. This deck cannot catch up at all with the other decks. It has no ability to do so. Like, it doesn't have the lore generators at any point in this game to catch up with the other 2 decks, so you cannot fall behind early. Having 1-drops to challenge early opponents' boards is absolutely the most important thing in your opening 7 hands. If you do not play a card for your first or second turn, you've basically already lost against any other deck that you could play against. So having a 1-drop is probably the most important thing, just to make sure that you're in the game at all. Stitch, I think, is the best of your 1-drop options, but honestly, any of them will help to slow down that opponent's early game. That kind of goes with Minnie Mouse here as well. She has the ability to trade very favorably into your opponent's early plays, slowing them down, keeping them from questing, and allowing you kind of to get to that sweet spot. But again, you want to make sure that she's in here. These 2 cards here, I would never toss back. These are unconditional cards that I would mulligan for. Magic Broom kind of gets tied in with Mickey Mouse. If you have a Mickey Mouse in your opening hand, then I would try to mulligan more aggressively for Magic Brooms. And conversely, like if you have Magic Brooms in your opening hand, maybe mulliganing more for Mickey Mouse, who for this deck I think is probably a little high. But if you don't have either one of them in my opening hand, I wouldn't be throwing away lots of cards to try to make this happen. But again, they're very, very good if you can establish even 1 Broom and 1 Mickey Mouse by turn 4. That is a very good place to be at. Maleficent, again, I'm never throwing this card away. The fact that she is inkable, the fact that she hits early, the fact that she is going to help trade with my opponent's early game and then replace herself when she comes into play. Never going to toss this card. Even if there's 2 of them in my hand, this card is fantastic. Rafiki here is sort of conditional in that I would always want at least 1 in my opening hand. I wouldn't want more than 1 because he is not inkable. He is kind of your ability to stop the bleeding if your opponent starts to go wide early on. Being able to come in on 3, immediately impact your opponent's board if they have exerted characters, and then hopefully survive to do it again the following turn, or at least threaten or take out somebody in the interim. This card is very, very good in making sure that you are not just getting completely left behind by your opponent's 2 lore generators and now 3 lore generators on 3 that they're going to be playing. I already talked about Mickey Mouse. Now, Facilier is a tough one. Again, like I said, when the deck first came out, everybody was just kind of hard mulliganing for this guy because he is so huge. And if you have him in your opening hand, I would just try to mulligan to as much ink generation as you can. Obviously, if you can get the smaller guy, smaller Facilier, the 2-drop Facilier in play to make this guy come out in 5, that is obviously preferred if you can make that happen. But this guy in play is the most impactful card in the Starter Deck Challenge by far. In limited format, maybe the most impactful card by far. So if you can get this guy, it is absolutely going to change the game if you can survive long enough to get to him. That's why I would not go throwing away good cards, these foundational cards up here, trying to make this happen every single game. Because if you mull your first 7 trying to aggressively get to the Facilier and you end up with a bunch of 4-drops and 5-drops and multiple Rafikis, you're going to be in a rough spot for that entire game. So like if you can get him in your opening 7, or if you can get like these 2 cards in your opening 7 and you want to throw away the rest of the 5 just to see if we can take a crack at getting Facility, I am fine with that, but you can't give up your early game to just have a chance at potentially running away with the game by turn 7. And then we have Friends on the Other Side. Again, similar to Maleficent, very rarely ever mulliganing this card away unless there are multiple copies in my opening hand. Just because I don't want to end up having to ink one of those copies would be the only reason why I wouldn't keep multiple copies. But this card is going to be very, very good. Again, usually you want to play like a Maleficent or Rafiki on 3, and then this card on 4, possibly being sung by one of those 2 if they're still around. Very, very solid card, and never going to be upset to see that card either. All right, so there you guys have it. That is our deck breakdown. That is the cards that I would drop and the cards I would mulligan for this deck. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Is this deck still the best deck for the Starter Deck Challenge, or is it one of the weaker decks for the Starter Deck Challenge? Let me know. Until next time though, guys, Hobby Hero out.